Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and in this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And during this video we're going to discuss several articles that we got from the United States of America, Ukraine and Russia. And in the second part of the video we're going to discuss the situation on the ground. The Russians during the previous 12 hours managed to improve their positions once again significantly. So let's start, and first let's begin with the most important statement, an article that we got from the United States of America. The US will supply weapons to Kiev, that was stated by Trump. The American president said that this is about defensive means. After this, the Pentagon announced that it would send additional defensive weapons to Ukraine at Trump's order. The statement was published on the resources of the US Department of Defense. So this is very important because now we see that the United States of America and personally Trump were forced to change their opinion regarding sending weapons to Ukraine, and most of all and most likely they made this decision based on the intelligence information about the situation on the ground. I would like to remind you that several days ago the Russians launched their major offensive operation in the Sumy region, in the Kharkiv area, in the area of the city of Siversk, Konstantinovsk, Pokrovsk, the South Donetsk direction, of course the Zaporozhye direction, and during the previous several days the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. Basically, the Russians are about to break through Ukraine defense completely, answer the operational space, which will allow the Russians to move deep inside of the territory of Ukraine, almost till the river of Dnipro. So that is why the Western countries are trying to stabilize the situation by sending weapons to Ukraine. We need to understand the important thing that this is not the process when, let's say, Trump made a decision and just now, these seconds, the weapons of the United States of America begin moving from the States towards Ukraine. I would like to remind you that several days ago the States stopped sending weapons to Ukraine from the area of Rzeszów, the territory of Poland. So it's just several kilometers from the border of Ukraine, and most likely by the time you're gonna watch this video, the Ukraine will start receiving first weapons that they will be able to use along the line of combat contact. So there are going to be no timing gap between between the announcement and the first weapons enter the territory of Ukraine. Another important article and statement we got from Kiev. Let's discuss this in details. Ukraine may restructure draft centers amid Russian strike threats. Vitaly Sarantsev, spokesman for Ukraine's Ground Forces Command, announced that the operations of military enlistment officers may be restructured due to the growing threat of Russian strikes. According to him, authorities are considering dispersing the centers, offering some services remotely. So this is very important because if you remember, several days ago, almost at the same time with the beginning of the Russian offensive operation, major offensive operation, the Russians began bombing and attacking the mobilization centers or enlistment centers all over the entire territory of Ukraine. And obviously right now, during this critical moment when every single soldier of Ukraine is important, the Ukrainian soldiers and commanders and forces along the line of combat contact are at risk to lose new, let's say, fresh mobilized forces due to Russian strikes on these enlistment centers. Furthermore, and the most important is that the population of Ukraine support these Russian strikes. So now Ukrainians are trying to reorganize this structure, but telling the truth, it may be too late. And the final article and statement we got from the territory of the Russian Federation, from Moscow. These days, the Foreign Minister of the Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, was interviewed by Western media, and he made lots of very interesting statements. Let's discuss them in details. So I would like to remind you once again that according to information we have, Russia is ready for the third round of talks between Ukraine and the Russian Federation, the territory of Istanbul. And according to Turkey's, the Russians already sent the message about this, that they are ready for a third round of talks, and now it's time for Ukrainians to make a decision when exactly they are ready for this third round of talks. And the Russians launched this offensive operation right exactly before this third round of talks with the purpose to improve their talks positions. So it's turn for Ukrainians to make a decision. And the Russians, before the beginning of this third round of talks, start sending their messages regarding explaining their vision of the peaceful settlement of the conflict in Ukraine. So this is the statement of the foreign minister. A sustainable settlement is impossible without addressing the root causes of the conflict. Above all, the security threats posed by NATO expansion and Ukraine's potential accession to the alliance must be eliminated, as they directly affect Russia. So, as we discussed, Russia will never accept Ukraine as a part of NATO. It is equally important to ensure respect for human rights in territories still under the control of the Kiev regime, where everything linked to Russia, Russians, and Russian-speaking people has been systematically destroyed since 2014. The Russian language, culture, traditions, Orthodox and Russian language media. Another important article that I would like to point your attention, because this is very important to understand how exactly the conflict in Ukraine can be finished. There must be international legal recognition of the new territories, realities formed following the accession of Crimea, Sevastopol, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, as well as the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions into the Russian Federation. On the agenda are the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, lifting of anti-Russian sanctions, withdrawal of lawsuits against Russia, and return of illegally frozen assets in the West. So when talking about this article, the most important are three words: international legal recognition. So this is very important because, as you can see, the Russians are seeking not just the recognition of Ukraine, of the new reality on the ground. So Russia wants not just Ukraine to recognize Zaporozhye, Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, Crimea as a part of the Russian Federation. It is very important for the Russians, as a result of the special military operation, to force the Western world and to force the entire world to recognize these territories as a part of the Russian Federation. Because, as I understand, even if Ukraine recognized these territories as a part of Russia, and let's say if the Western countries don't do this, this will force the Russians to continue their special military operation until they get the borders with, let's say, the European Union or NATO, let's say along the border with Poland. So this is very important, and telling the truth, I'm not sure that the Western countries are going to recognize Ukraine, part of Ukraine, as a territory of the Russian Federation. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. As we discussed in the beginning of this video, during the previous 12 hours, the Russians once again managed to improve their positions significantly. And the Russians are doing this right now to improve their talk positions before the beginning of the negotiation process between Russia and Ukraine, the territory of Istanbul. And the most important updates this morning are coming probably from the Sumy direction. As you can see, we have changes on the ground. The Russians managed to improve their positions, and we finally got geolocations that confirm Russian presence and Russian control for at least 50% of the settlement of Yunakivka. So let's start from details, and let's begin with the village of Kondratovka. If you remember, yesterday we discussed that Ukrainians are planning to counterattack in this area, and for these purposes, first the Ukrainians send their forces and units with the purpose to cut the supply line between the village of Kondratovka and the village of Konstantinovka, and as a result of clashes during the previous 48 hours, first the Ukrainians managed to cut this road and to establish complete control over this territory. This is not very good for the Russians, because now they need to think what to do next with this. They need to think how they needed to think how unblock this road, but the problem is that today, according to many mappers, different sources, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions along this tree line, along this supply line, and most important, the Ukrainians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to answer the village of Kondratovka from the northwest. So today the Ukrainians will try to improve their positions. Once again, they also need to improve their positions before the beginning of talks, and most likely the Ukrainians are going to use these cards, this trump card of the battle for the Sumy direction, and they will show that the Western countries, first of all, that they are able to force the Russians to fall back from the entire Sumy region. As for now, they will try to restore control over 2 or 3 settlements, at least in the western part of this foothold. At the same time, the Russians continue their offensive in the central and on the eastern flank. According to information we have, the village of Varachin is about to be taken by the Russians. We believe that according to different sources, the village of Varachina would be taken by the Russians during the upcoming days or even hours. And the most important, the settlement of Yunakivka. As you can see, we have adjusted the map. Let's compare the map between the dates. This is the situation by the end of the 7th of July of 2025. All these territories used to be considered as a gray zone or contested area, and today we have enough of geolocations to make a conclusion that these territories, up to 50% of Yunakivka, were taken by the Russians completely. This video was published by the Ukrainian sources, and in this video we can see how Ukrainians of 156 mechanized brigade were attacking Russians that were freely moving on the territory of the village of Yunakivka. All these soldiers are troopers of the Russian forces, of the armored forces of the Russian Federation. And here we can see lots of episodes how Ukrainians were attacking them in different parts of the village. So several episodes took place in the central part and in the western part. Several episodes took place in the northern part. So based on this video and all these geolocations, we adjusted the map and colored the village of Yunakivka under almost complete control of the armored forces of the Russian Federation. So the Russians will try to use the village of Yunakivka as their stronghold before the beginning of talks between Russia and Ukraine. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Sivers direction. There are very heavy clashes. Today several pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of clashes during the previous 12 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to secure completely the central part of the settlement of Serebryanka. With this rate, most likely the Russians will be able to secure the village itself completely during the next week or something like this. So we are waiting that the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, or when the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm complete control over this territory. Now let's talk about the Konstantinovka-Pokrovsk arc direction. Let's talk about N32 road. The situation here is very difficult for the Ukrainians. The Russians launched their major offensive operation, and it's not just a major offensive, it's already a major battle, because everything in the area between the cities of Pokrovsk, Slaviansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka would be resolved exactly in this area. Who wins the battle for the N32 bridgehead will win the entire battle for the Pokrovsk, Donetsk, for the Donbas arc operation. First of all, the Russians improved their positions in the western part of Yablunovka, and according to information we have, during the previous 12 hours, the Russians finished the battle for several strongholds in the northwestern part. So the western part is already under complete Russian control, and now the Russians are going to move further. There are just 2 or 3 strongholds left under complete Ukraine control. We are talking about strongholds to the north of the settlement of Yablunovka. So these are the territories. This information about this progress on the ground was confirmed both by neutral mappers and by pro-Ukrainian resources. So the Russians currently control up to 40% of the village of Yablunovka, and they continue advancing. As for the settlement of Novaya Ekonomichna, as you can see, during the previous 12 hours, we got lots of icons from this area, and we have changes on the ground. According to information we have, yesterday the Russians managed to break through Ukrainian defense and to answer the village of the city of Novaya Ekonomichna from the south. This is the video we are talking about. This is the video we discussed during the previous update. Here we can see how Russians were attacking the settlement of Novaya Ekonomichna from the southeast, how Ukrainians were trying to do everything the best, everything they could with the purpose to slow down the Russians or to stop them. They used hundreds of drones, but it didn't help them to slow down the Russians. They managed to land infantry and to dig in deeper. And today we got additional geolocation from this video. The Russian vehicles, according to different sources, were moving using these roads of attack. So they were attacking these areas using something like this. And based on this video, based on this road, based on everything we have already received from this area, we colored these territories in Russian favor. Furthermore, the sources are saying that currently the Russians are focused on 2 tasks. The first one is to improve their positions in the central part, to dig in deeper and not to allow the Ukrainians to counterattack with the purpose to restore control over this territory. At the same time, the Russians are trying to cut this pocket. So this is a primary target for the Russians, to cut this pocket, to maintain the lines, to shorten the distances, and to get the Novaya Ekonomichna and the village of Mykolaiv Yunakivka from the east. So most likely during these days we are going to see very heavy clashes exactly for this territory, especially for the village of Nikolaevka. At the same time, the Ukrainians are sending everything they have in the direction of the city with the purpose to stabilize the situation. They are bringing more and more vehicles, equipment, and forces. The Russians see this redeployment. The Russians establish complete FPV drone control over this territory, and when the Russians see anything, they attack and destroy this immediately. In this video, we can see how Russians were attacking the settlement of Nova Ekonomichna from different parts. Many geolocations, many episodes were geolocated and added to map. So there are very heavy clashes in this area, and we see that as for the beginning of the 8th of July of 2025, the situation develops completely in Russian favor. At the same time, according to information we have, the Russians began advancing to the north of the settlement of Razina. This time, the Russians are trying to break through Ukrainian defense and to answer the settlements of Boykovka and Novotoretska. The Russians are attacking and advancing in this area with the purpose to improve their foothold in the area of Mirnograd, Rodinska, Novoekonomichna by taking under control all these settlements and fields. This will allow the Russians to secure their offensive operation in the direction of Rodinska and with the purpose to outflank the city of Pokrovsk and Sukhot, the Ukrainian Sun Cauldron. So the major battle is ongoing, and the next days are going to be very important. As for the South Donetsk direction, the Russians continue their offensive operation in this area as well. Several mappers continue adjusting their maps. As for now, there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Mirne. The Ukrainians are trying to evacuate their vehicles and soldiers. The Russians establish complete FPV drone control. Most likely during the next several hours, the villages of Mirne and Tolstoy would be taken by the Russians, and the battle will move further in the western directions to the villages of Voskresenka and Andreevka-Klivtsova. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.